Chapter 8. Bates's Ultimatum. Oliver could barely stay in his seat on Monday when Mr. Bates walked into the classroom. He had so many things he wanted to ask him about, but he was also apprehensive. The image of his math teacher holding a red glowing blade to his chest had stuck with him. Also, he practically had a heart attack when he saw Aubrey Wallace sit in her assigned seat 2 rows back and 1 row to the left. She glared at him, and he sensed the hatred coming from her again, just like before. He also noticed that she grimaced in pain when she moved. What had happened to her? Rory, sitting right next to him, leaned over. "Hey man, you got your bright blade on you?" "What? No, it's school. No weapons, Rory." "Dude, you think she's following the rules?" Rory asked. "You gotta stay safe." Oliver thought about it. He was right, but maybe bringing a high-tech energy sword to school wasn't the best way to stay under the radar. He didn't want to have to explain to Principal Burke, any of his other teachers, or especially the cops why he had it, and he wasn't sure if Mr. Bates could shield him from the consequences if he decided to do something that stupid. That same standard applied to Marcel, Selena, and Aubrey. "Mr. Bates won't let anything happen here. Aubrey isn't that dumb," Oliver told Rory. "Well, if she is, I got something from the cathedral with me." Oliver's eyes grew wide, and his heart skipped a beat, but before he could give Rory the tongue-lashing he deserved, Mr. Bates cleared his throat. He was looking at the two of them. "Gentlemen, shall we begin class, or do you two have something to share with everyone?" "Now we're good," Rory said, sitting back with a grin. Oliver had no choice but to do the same, except he knew his fake smile was nowhere near as convincing as his friend's. As they went through quadratic equations, Oliver's least favorite mathematical concept so far, he couldn't help but glance around the room. Marcel wasn't there, and Selena was in a different period, so he kept looking back at Aubrey. The young woman's makeup was worse for wear. She was trying to focus on the work just as much as he was, and failing just as often. Whenever their eyes met, Oliver tried to push back against her hatred by giving off that same courageous, fearless power he'd felt from Marcel on Friday night at the cafe before the attack. It only seemed to stall her. She would not be deterred. Oliver mentally put himself back in the training room, reminding himself of some of the combat moves that he'd learned from Dominus Holly in his sparring sessions with Marcel. One weekend of training wouldn't be a match for a vice like Aubrey, but if she did come after him, it was better than nothing. This is what it's like to be hunted, he thought. Eventually, Mr. Bates's desk timer went off, signaling that the bell was about to ring and he needed to make end-of-class announcements. "Your homework is on the board, so make sure it is completed by the time you return tomorrow. Also, Mr. Byrne and Mr. Henderson, please stay after class for a moment. I need to speak with you." Then, almost as an afterthought, he said, "And also, Miss Wallace, you as well, if you don't mind." Oliver and Aubrey looked at one another, and for the first time her rageful expression cracked into nervousness. As all the other students filed out, the 3 of them stood before Mr. Bates's desk, waiting for the door to shut. Mr. Bates was writing notes on the day's classes in his teacher notebook, and Oliver tensed up as Aubrey's shoulder brushed against his. Everything he felt flowing from her was the total opposite of what he'd felt from Selena yesterday evening. The intensity of the emotional contradiction was enough to make his head spin. The moment the latch on the door clicked shut, Mr. Bates waved his hand and locked it, then looked up at the 3 of them. "Oliver, what do you have going on today after school?" "Nothing. I was planning on coming to see you." Mr. Bates smiled. "Excellent. I'm sure you have many questions, and I will answer all that I can. Meet me here in my classroom after school, and I will take you where you need to go." "What about me, Mr. Bates?" asked Rory. "You're more than welcome, as long as Oliver does not mind." "No, sir, I don't," said Oliver. "Then come along and enjoy the show," said Mr. Bates, smiling at Rory. "Sweet. But first, I must ask you to hand over the pulse phase detonator you stole from Holly at the cathedral." The other 2 students looked at Rory in astonishment, and he pulled the shiny, button-riddled orb from his backpack. "Dude," moaned Oliver. "Seriously?" said Aubrey. "Girl, it's your fault," Rory said to her. "If you weren't trying to kill my friend, I wouldn't have had to bring a space grenade to school." He handed the detonator to Mr. Bates, who quickly and calmly shut it into a drawer in his desk. "Aubrey, they bring up a valid point," Mr. Bates said, turning to her. "Do you all understand why this is a problem?" Aubrey looked at him, incredulous. "You've got to be joking." "I'm a perfectly serious man, Aubrey. Mr. Bates told her, folding his hands. "You're a math teacher." "I'm also a former Vice Bellator who practices Razia, and a former Veros champion who practices Bairu," he said. His eyes grew dark. "You would be wise to stay out of my affairs." "I'm on a mission from Kaidat Atharoy himself," hissed Aubrey, glaring at Oliver. "He would be wise to stay out of my affairs as well," Bates growled. "Fine, I'll tell him you said that," said Aubrey. "Do not fool yourself or think you can fool me," Bates told her. "We both know this conversation would not be necessary if you were not De Theory and trying to prove yourself back to being a Bellator." Oliver watched Aubrey carefully. Her bottom lip quivered in both sadness and rage, he thought. "You can't tell me what to do," she mumbled. "You're not my Taiki." Bates glared at her. "You don't have a Taiki, Miss Wallace." She looked like she was about to burst into tears and wanted to leave. "What do you want from me?" she asked through clenched teeth. "Your assurance that you will leave Oliver Byrne alone, chiefly." Oliver could feel the conflict raging within her. "Is my mission. The Kaidat told me personally." "Irrelevant." "Mr. Bates, come on!" Aubrey exclaimed. "You know how it is. I have to do this. I can't go back until I do." "Being De Theory is not the worst thing in the world, Aubrey. Trust me." Aubrey looked hurt by these words. "You know it's not like that for me." Mr. Bates stared at her for a long moment, then sighed and sat back. "Very well, Miss Wallace, I will help you out. If you cannot return until Arthur deems you to no longer be De Theory, I will let him know that Oliver Byrne is off limits until further notice. Thus your mission has ended." She scoffed at him. "Yeah, right. Like he'll listen to you?" Bates glared. "I won't give him a choice, just like I am not giving you one. Now either give me your assurance that you will leave him alone before you walk out, or I will give you my assurance of the unpleasant consequences." Aubrey threw her hands up and grabbed her backpack. "Whatever, fine. He's yours. I'm hands off. Is that good enough for you?" Without waiting for an answer, she walked over and yanked at the door, but it wouldn't budge until Mr. Bates turned his wrist and unlocked it. She left the room in a huff and slammed the door on her way out. Oliver and Rory turned back to Mr. Bates, able to breathe again. "You really believe she'll leave me alone?" Oliver asked. "Not in the slightest," Mr. Bates said. "But now she'll be held accountable for it if she refuses to obey, and she knows I'm watching her." "So wait, you could just go to this Arthur guy and tell him what to do?" Rory asked. "Who are you, Mr. Bates?" Mr. Bates smiled. "I'm a very persuasive man, Mr. Henderson. I'll see you both after school today." The rest of the day's classes were uneventful, and Aubrey left Oliver alone in Mrs. King's last period history class. Selina wanted to know if Oliver was planning to head to the cathedral today, but he had to turn her down. She looked disappointed and relieved at the same time, but when she said he and Rory were going with Mr. Bates, she was alarmed. "Ollie, please be careful." "He's keeping Aubrey off my back," Oliver told her. "You're not safe with him," Selina said. "No one knows whose side he's on." "He's fine with Rory coming. Come with us." Selina thought for a long moment, then nodded. After the end of the period, the three of them left two poor souls to clean Mrs. King's desks, and made their way quickly to Mr. Bates's room. Oliver kept looking over his shoulder and saw Aubrey once at her locker, but she didn't give him anything other than her usual menacing glare. When Oliver asked Mr. Bates if Selina could go with them, he was hesitant to allow it. "Miss Diaz, I know you do not trust me, and you have every right not to. However, you will not enjoy our activities today, given your past experiences." "I'm with Ollie, Mr. Bates," she said. To Oliver's shock and Rory's dismay, she took his hand in hers. "I'm going with him." Mr. Bates chuckled, then led them out of the school to his car in the staff parking lot. The four of them piled into the four-door sedan with Rory riding shotgun, and off they went. Selina had not let go of Oliver's hand since taking it in the classroom. She held on to it during the drive as Rory peppered their teacher with questions. "So, Mr. Bates, are you from space?" "Yes, Rory, I have been to space." "But, are you from space?" Mr. Bates laughed. That is a complicated answer, Rory, but I will say I have more experience on other worlds than anyone on Earth does today. So, you know all about other planets? How many have you been to? Oh, dozens at least. For real? Do they all have aliens on them? Well, if by alien you mean people that are not from Earth, of course they do. I wouldn't have had to go there otherwise. What do aliens look like, Mr. Bates? Asked Oliver. I'm sure Selina has told you. She shook her head. No, I've never been off-world. You haven't? Mr. Bates seemed genuinely surprised. That shocks me, Miss Diaz, truly. Selina's grip on Oliver's hand grew tighter. I wasn't let out much. Mr. Bates's expression softened. Oh, I see. I apologize. It's okay. Rory wanted to get back on track with the conversation. So, how many kinds of aliens are there? Only one, actually. You're looking at them now. Wait, huh? Humans are aliens? Yes, indeed. Is that because they've colonized other planets? Oliver asked. Bates chuckled. Correct. They've colonized hundreds of thousands of them, including this one. Huh? My dear boy, surely you didn't think that Earth was the origin of human life, did you? No, not by a long shot. Human life came from somewhere much farther away, millions and millions of years ago, long before people could travel the cosmos. This world's human history only goes back a few 100,000 years, a drop in the bucket. Wait, so if you've been to other planets, why are you still British? Mr. Bates chuckled again. I am not British, I am American. No, like your accent. Well, that comes from the Vice. Are they British? No, the British are them. The British accent has been passed down through the generations of the monarchy when the Vice ruled the Britons. Oliver's mind was exploding with the implications, but Rory still hadn't gotten the answer to his most important question. So, Mr. Bates, you've been to tons of other planets, right? Oliver knew that look in his friend's eyes. Rory, don't. Yes, as I said, dozens at least. So you've met a lot of different people? Oh, certainly thousands. So then, like, how many space babes have you, done it with? Selina let go of Ollie's hand to cover her face. Oh my God. You can't ask a teacher that, Rory! Oliver yelled from the back seat. But Mr. Bates laughed more loudly and more genuinely than they had ever seen. Not even one car ride, he hollered. Not even one! Geez, Henderson, Selina snapped. Grow up. But she was still smiling and trying not to laugh herself. I'll make you a deal, Rory, said Mr. Bates. Never ask me about my love life again, and I promise to introduce you to a drop-dead gorgeous space babe before you turn 21. Deal? Oliver thought Rory was going to melt into the passenger seat, but the young man reached over and shook Mr. Bates's outstretched hand. Mr. Bates, you got yourself a deal.